Hello and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab Talk. I'm Sarah Wallazin. I'm the director of the lab. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Asad Malik, a groundbreaking artist and entrepreneur who has been experimenting with holograms and augmented reality with great impact since his college days at Bennington, where he graduated in 2019. While in college, he produced Harry Potter Hololens, as well as projects that dealt with serious topics such as holograms from Syria and Terminal 3, which premiered at Tribeca Film Festival to critical acclaim in 2018. He founded his first company, One Rick, while still in college, and most recently he founded Jadu, another augmented reality startup, this one featuring an interactive hologram app, which marries music and holograms. His work has been heralded in major magazines from Rolling Stones to Forbes, and Assad was named one of Variety's 10 innovators to watch, Rolling Stone's Future 25, and Forbes 30 Under 30. We'll learn more about all of this in his talk today, including his movement into Web3 with the development of his world-scale AR project, the Mirrorverse. After his talk, we will have time for questions, and please put your questions into the Q&A and we'll do our best to have them answered. So without further ado, Asad Malik.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really lovely to be here and be able to speak to you. It's been, I feel like, a moment since I've given a talk in any academic setting, so it's a good moment of self-reflection, honestly. I will share my screen and I will, start with this presentation. Hopefully we can see that. Sweet. So Sarah, do you mind giving a thumbs up if my screen is working?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, lovely. So, to start off, we're calling this talk very simply, just naming it Augmented Reality and Web3. Those of you with an eager eye will notice that on the details of the talk, when you signed up, it actually said Augmented Reality in Web3. But last night while putting this presentation together, it felt like it was giving Web3 a bit too much weight. I think AR is really, a lot of what this presentation is going to be about. And, Web3 is kind of, I know it's a very bipolar topic right now. People have a lot of strong opinions about it on either side of the spectrum. And I'm hoping to unpack it a bit more and, kind of see how it fits in with my AR work and why it's going to allow, us to do a lot of the things that a lot of my career has kind of led up to. But, for the most part, the idea, the way I want to do this talk is that the first 45 minutes is really me going to be I'll just be going through chronologically my career and a bunch of the projects that Sarah mentioned and just talking about them and really just giving you as much as I can. Probably not the most synthesized information, but in terms of volume, just really laying everything in front. And hopefully that will give us the right framework and groundwork for a follow-up Q&A session, which would also last 45 minutes, in which I think we can really start to unpack some of these ideas and get into especially the Web3 side of things, because that's where everything is heading in terms of my career. And, all the projects I will discuss kind of lead up to that. So I'm going to start by being, just first of all, looking at this statement, which, we'll be returning to a couple times. Whenever you try to synthesize a project down to kind of a log line, it's a challenge because, does it capture the real essence of the project? Is it too oriented around marketing, or is it really kind of communicating what we want to be saying? So there's a lot to unpack here, but, as you can see, really, these three things have been highlighted. We are building a game world. A game world is a world that has its own rules and, it has its own physics and, constraints and ideas of what can happen within it, what cannot. And we're building this game world on top of our physical world, so it has a very direct relation to it. And a key thing about this game world is that it has a lot of virtual items in it that are actually owned by the people that play it. Now, I know that, ownership of virtual assets, it's a whole topic onto itself, which I think we'll get to towards the end. But really how I want to lead up to the statement is kind of talking about a lot of my earlier work. And for that, I'm going to be a bit self-indulgent first and just go through some of my upbringing, because obviously that is closely tied to whatever you end up producing at the end of the day. So, just to frame that a bit, I was born in Abbottabad, Pakistan. This is me and my mom in Abbottabad in probably like 98 or something like that. And, Abbottabad, it's an interesting place because first, as you can see in this photo, it's snowing. That is often already a surprise to a lot of people where, people just have a perception of Pakistan being a dry desert Arabian land, which it really isn't. It's next to India and has very diverse geology. So Abbottabad, it was an interesting place because it kind of connected the south to the north. You would drive through Abbottabad to go up to the mountains, and it was always known to be this kind of relatively quiet hill station town. And things really changed quite dramatically when I was in my early teens. And when Osama bin Laden was found and killed in Abbottabad, 5 minutes from this house, actually, my cousins saw the helicopters crash into Osama bin Laden's house. One of the helicopters crashed into the house, and they actually saw it that happen and heard the explosion and whatnot. So I was born in Abbottabad, and I grew up in a small town called Kura, and also in Pakistan. My dad was a teacher. We moved to Kura when I was relatively young, and Kura, once again, tiny town, just very deserted kind of geology. The key thing about Kura is that there's too much salt in the soil, and actually all the Himalayan salt lamps that people see come from Kura. So we have the second largest salt mine in the world, and all of this rock salt that we're used to seeing comes from my town. And that's really kind of the main thing that it's known for. And it's not really the Himalayas either. It's called the Salt Range, but marketing terms. But at a very young age, when I was around 11, I really got obsessed with computers. And we all love computers. It's not anything unique at this point to say, oh, I was into computers when I was 11. But it just really became this kind of really fascinating escape for me because I was living in a small town in Pakistan, and there were opportunities around, and I think I went to a really nice school that my dad was the principal of, and there were a lot of co-curricular activities happening all the time, and we just got to learn a lot. But the internet really was when I really found my own agency and started finding so much fun and creation and having people use things that I was making. So when I was 11, I started just making websites, and a lot of the websites I was making initially were just for myself, and then they became for me and my friends, and then very slowly they started to become about people in other countries. And I think that was really like a big inflection point in terms of my confidence when people in the US and people in the UK kids that had their own MacBooks, which I thought was crazy because I would sneak into my dad's room to use the computer, were complimenting my websites, and I just felt like, wow, I can do something that's good enough on an international scale. And it really kind of produced a sense of confidence. And just I kept making websites and doing a bunch of things. By the time I was 16, I ended up getting this ridiculous kind of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory level scholarship. So living in Kura, I ended up getting into something called UWC, which is a network of high schools all across the world. These are international high schools. UWC stands for United World Colleges. And so at age 16, I got up and left to go study in the Netherlands, which was where I got the scholarship for. And it just suddenly I went from living in this small town to having friends from every single country possible, 16-year-olds that had all left their homes. We had people that were refugees. We had people that were royalty. So it just put me on a different, stage. While being in UWC, this photo is actually me and the king of the Netherlands, King Willem-Alexander. And it's still kind of absurd to me that this event took place. But when I was 16, I got to go to the palace in The Hague and give a speech in front of the King of the Netherlands. And, that was kind of the environment we were in. Nelson Mandela was the president of our high school network. And, there are all these people that we were learning from. And it was a really fascinating time, and, instilled a lot of confidence in me. And coming out of high school, me and my friend Lars, who you see here in the photo, I wonder if he's on this call. We were roommates in UWC, and he was from Prague, and we just became really close friends. And over the 2 years that we lived with each other, I was doing all the science subjects. I was doing like high level math and physics and English and economics, and Steppy he was working on more visual arts, and he wanted to be an architect. So we did this weird thing where by the end of 2 years of living with each other, we completely switched roles, and he ended up going to school for science and I ended up going to an art school. And but our relationship just set off. We started working on a project together that kind of really gave us a lot of these skills. We took a gap year during which he came to Pakistan. This is a photo of me and him in Kira, my hometown. And he came there twice, and we lived there, and we kept working on kind of this project. And, after a year, we realized that, we had to go to college. We had to figure that portion out. And that's kind of when, Bennington College came in. And, I basically, in, I believe, 2015, got a scholarship to go to Bennington. Now, when you go to UWC, it helps a lot with getting into schools in the US. Schools in the US really like international students that have already been kind of, prepared by these high schools. And so with that, you have some flexibility in terms of what school you can get to, and there are some possibilities of scholarships and whatnot. And so really looking thoroughly, I found Bennington, and I didn't want to go to college. So when I found Bennington, it was a place where there were no grades and there was no curriculum, obviously there was a curriculum, but there were no required classes or anything. So I was like, okay, that sounds like more my speed, where I can kind of work on my own projects, because that's what I was excited about. But Bennington ended up being like this really eye-opening experience for me in many ways. Obviously I got to develop like socially and in terms of, the kind of breadth of my perspective, because I think going into Bennington, I had a relatively techno-utopic kind of worldview, very Silicon Valley oriented, very like reading Paul Graham essays about VC funding and whatnot. And I really had my head kind of in that world. So coming to Bennington was really interesting, because everyone else at Bennington, their parents had kind of already made it. That's how it felt like to me, at least. There were a lot of kids from LA and New York, and their parents were doing really well, and the kids were like trying to find meaning and purpose in something other than forming a successful company or doing well in your career financially. And the arts was kind of that escape, and people wanted to study film photography and ceramics. And once again, coming from Pakistan, kind of going through this trajectory, it was new to me. But being at Bennington, over time, I started realizing that I also wanted a lot of that. That's why I had ended up in an art school. I actually went to Silicon Valley, lived there for a summer, and just didn't have a good time. I thought that, the way of thinking was really like everyone thought the same way. And going back to Bennington, I just decided that I wanted to form a career that was very technically, reliant on new technology, and kind of was designed to push new technology forward, but doing so with the lens of expression and creativity. So that kind of brings me to the, core of what we're discussing, which is augmented reality. And this is something that basically, while at Bennington, I was studying architecture, and at some point I ended up actually trying the HoloLens, which was Microsoft's mixed reality device. And I immediately was like, okay, this is there's a lot that can happen here, and people are currently only working on it from an enterprise use case perspective. So in terms of things that are creative, this could be really interesting. So I spent a summer trying to collect enough money personally so I could buy a HoloLens, which I eventually was able to. And I got it and I started making things. And, there was a learning experience. I'd never worked with game engines before, but, the first thing I made in the first kind of 2 weeks of having the HoloLens was what you just saw with this kind of, a quick Harry Potter demo of some spells in AR. And the idea with this project was very simple. I just wanted something that would find some traction online. There was nothing more in depth about it. I was finding an excuse to learn how to use this device, and I wanted to see how people react. So I made this video of these spells and put it online, and just in a week, the video ended up getting 2 million views, and a lot of people were talking about it, and it was getting reshared and started showing up in the news. And it kind of opened my eyes, and I was like, okay, well, AR, like, not only, it has this novelty right now as a medium. So, if something interesting is done in AR, people pay attention, although it's not really in a position where it can be a mass market product. So, it put me on this path where I was like, okay, I definitely need to explore this further. But one of the things that, was happening with AR for me was, I didn't want to just spend my time building other people's IP into AR. That was something a lot of people were doing. People would build like Mario in AR, and they don't own the rights or anything. They're just experimenting, and those videos get views online. So that's kind of where it was coming from. But I started spending a lot of time just thinking about, AR from, taking a few steps back. Once again, being in art school, I had a lot of professors who could just hand me a bunch of readings about like media studies and media archaeology and, critical theory. And so I found that all really interesting. And I started, thinking of AR from more of a conceptual lens. And, I was studying Martha Rosler's work in Bennington, which, Martha Rosler was doing these incredible collages of the Vietnam War. So photos from the Vietnam War collaged onto interior design magazines. So they're very striking images because of the contrast of, war that's waging and, the normal life in one of the countries that is involved with the war. So, coming out of that, I decided to build this project called Holograms from Syria, which really is how it sounds like. I just took a bunch of images from the war in Syria and put them in different spaces through the HoloLens in AR. So whenever I was traveling around the US, I would just kind of put these images in AR there. And, I released a video of a bunch of these images. Just really, the concept was to show to juxtapose just these two things. It's really like not that deep in my opinion at this point, but, this was a half-an-hour project I put together and put online. And slowly, it wasn't as quick as the Harry Potter thing, but slowly started spreading. And I started seeing it pop up in kind of, Vice and Quartz and Hyperallergic and a bunch of these kind of publications. And that's kind of what put me on this path where a bunch of people started getting in touch with me. And really the first one that was very significant was this guy, Hussein from Sundance, who was running Sundance's New Frontier program. And basically, New Frontiers is where they display immersive work. And Hussein reached out and he said, hey man, like, the work you're doing is really interesting. I think it would do really well in the film festival circuit. And that was just kind of a surprise to me. I didn't even know that there was things happening in the film festival circuit that were dealing with anything immersive. But I was really intrigued and, I got really excited. And as things go with a lot of my career, just, I get really excited about something and I just try to drive a lot of momentum to that thing. So really, like, the moment the possibility of Sundance came up, I got a bunch of my friends together and formed a team. And this is kind of the beginnings of OneRick, which became our augmented reality studio that we produced a bunch of projects out of for the next few years. But, the core member here really being Jack, who you see on the screen here, who's our CTO now. But Jack started with me as a sound designer. He was just, studying sound production in Bennington, and we just needed a sound designer for our experience, and we kind of brought him on. And for this project, we raised like $20,000 on Kickstarter. It was one of those things where I was like, we can just sit and make it, because we said, like, we sit down and make projects all the time. Like, it's not a big deal. We could make it, take it to a film festival. However, if we are getting into a film festival, seems like a good excuse to actually raise resources. And initially I was like, we're just going to need $20,000. And very soon I realized, actually, in order to put stuff out at a high level, you actually need a lot of money. And, things end up getting really expensive really quickly. So before we knew it, the Terminal 3, which was our next project, which was really our first proper major project, the budget was over $100,000. And, we started working on this, and we're able to get the project into Tribeca the same year we started working on it, pretty much. And once we got into the Tribeca Film Festival, we were able to go raise more resources. And, a lot of the work was already done, but then we were able to raise and actually pay the whole team. So Terminal 3 is really like, I know that I'm saying a lot and there's so much to cover, honestly. I don't even know how much we'll be able to go through, but Terminal 3 is one where I think it's worth spending some time on, because this is the one that Sarah saw as well. This is kind of my work that I suppose a lot of people have seen in the film festival circuit, or people that pay attention to these kind of spaces. Terminal 3 was a really special project. It really set us, it really put us out into the world. As I was saying earlier, I'm from Pakistan. I grew up where Osama bin Laden was killed. And, while at Bennington, I went to Libya briefly. I went to Libya for 2 months, which was once again with one of my UWC friends. And, which was really fascinating, being in Libya straight after Gaddafi was killed. And there were two governments fighting for control, and ISIS had control over Sirte and a bunch of parts of Libya. And it was an intense time. But coming out of Libya, obviously, I started getting a lot more interrogations. That was happening already, but it started getting a bit intense. So, obviously in every airport imaginable, I would be taken into customer screenings and go through like 5 rounds of interviews. And eventually it got to a point where 2 FBI agents actually showed up in my college in Vermont to interrogate me. And it was, all of these were really interesting experiences. Interrogations are really weird because there is a human element to, your interrogator. Like, they're also like are getting to know you, but they have to operate in a certain way. And, I would always like try to form relationships with my interrogators and, try to kind of, play with their expectations. Or, obviously interrogators, their job is also to make you feel comfortable and make you feel like they're your friend, where often they may not be. But Terminal 3 was exploring the dichotomies of all these ideas of interrogations. And so really what we had built was, we worked for like around 4 months. We raised these resources. We built these physical interrogation rooms at Tribeca. And we built this AR experience where we were actually capturing holograms of various Muslim passengers that were coming into the US. Now, what I mean by holograms, really at this point, it's relatively simple. We were just capturing, 3D perspective of various people that were traveling. So we were using the Microsoft Connect, and, the Microsoft Connect captures RGB data and also captures depth data. So you can kind of give pixels depth. And we were working, we used something called Depth Kit. It's a framework developed by a company called Scatter out of New York, and they were really kind, and they gave us a lot of access to their tools. So we used that to build these holograms. And really, this is kind of how the experience would go. You would go into this interrogation room, you would put on a HoloLens headset, and you would play act as a customs officer. So you would be the customs officer. You would hear your supervisor, through the radio in your ears, basically telling you what to do. And you kind of have to interrogate these holograms that are coming through this room. We had these huge one-way mirrors in the installation where from the other side people could see into it. And the viewer would then be able to basically ask questions. So these were branching narratives that we were designing. Once again, we're spending some time on this because this is for the Doc Lab. So this is a documentary as far as I'm concerned, right? This is the interviews we did with our subjects were play acted more than anything else. We would have 2 interrogators, that would basically play good cop and bad cop in relation to the subject and ask them questions. And we were recording everything, and we were then able to create these branching narratives where the user would be able to ask 1 out of 2 questions at a time using their own voice. So your voice would trigger the response from the hologram. And that's kind of how we had built it. And the hologram was sitting in front of a stool in front of you. And so the questions that we were playing with, initially it would start off with very interrogation oriented questions, such as, show me your passport, where are you coming from? Have you ever been in touch with the Taliban? It starts to get into that kind of stuff. But over time, the questioning starts to become more and more abstracted. So you start branching off into things that are more personal, or things that, are a bit that don't really make sense in an interrogation room. You start asking questions about, have you ever been in love? And the holograms start giving these really elaborate responses, because we interviewed them for hours, and they got to soft spots as well and discussed things that they cared about. So these were always the way we would design our branching narratives, where they weren't super open-ended. They were very tight. We would actually guide you through somewhat of a dramatic arc. So at the end of this experience, what you would do is you would have to make a decision on whether or not you're going to let this person into the country. So you would basically have to walk into a second room. You would get up and walk into a second room and let the person know your decision. Now, this is where we were doing this interesting thing where instead of having the hologram in the second room, we actually had the real person in the second room. So the real person whose hologram we had made was sitting, waiting for you in the flesh in the second room. And we wouldn't really let you talk. We would just let you have this incredibly brief encounter of you entering the room and realizing that the hologram you had been speaking to is a real person who's been sitting in the other room all along, overhearing your conversation as well. And that was a really strong moment for a lot of people, where the physical and the virtual kind of come together in this really intense manner. And what just a few minutes ago felt like a game or a mock interrogation suddenly carries so much weight, because you see the real person, sitting there. So that was kind of what Terminal 3 was. And we had interviewed 6 different people for it. And, the project really took off, because it was the first AR experience attempting to do anything close to this, right? All the AR that had existed in the world at this point was architecture and design and warehouses. This is pre-Instagram Snapchat filters. That was not a thing. Your average person did not know what AR meant. So when we put this experience out, Trump's travel ban was taking place as well. So Trump's Muslim travel ban. So there was some political significance to the timing on this. And, we ended up taking it on a world tour. We ended up having it displayed at the Barbican Center in London and, a bunch of places. And I was a junior in college while this was happening, my undergrad at Bennington, which was pretty absurd because, we were pretty much had a project on tour while we were in school. And, already very quickly after Terminal 3 came together, we had actually started working on our next project. And, we were actually able to raise financing for it very quickly because of the success Terminal 3 was having in the film festival circuit. So, while we kind of entered my senior year of college, we started working on probably a more abstract, more, honestly, it's a crazy project. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that we got it funded. But we built this thing called A Jester's Tale that ended up going to the Sundance Film Festival. Now, this is where we were able to actually raise some money. So I had some budget to play with and, had a slightly bigger team. It was still mostly composed of my friends, but we were able to get into much more high quality recordings and whatnot. So this is, you saw that really briefly, but we used a really advanced volumetric capture with 106 cameras, used to recreate the subjects. And, what you see in the video is kind of some snippets from the experience. But we had built this set that was a kid's bedroom at Sundance. And we'd done all the set design, and you would basically be able to see a story unfold within this room, which, was framed as kind of a reverse Turing test. So the concept was that, you try to get into the experience, but it kind of runs you through a CAPTCHA test. So it says, are you a robot? Prove you're not a robot. And you kind of do one CAPTCHA test after the other, and slowly the CAPTCHA tests just start getting really elaborate, and you get stuck in kind of this AR CAPTCHA test hell, in which the whole experience is a giant CAPTCHA test. It's just trying to see if you're a machine or not. And, to do that, it kind of shows you a lot of emotionally manipulative, footage of this kid that tries to build a relationship with you. And, there are these rats that he's friends with. And it's a pretty absurd thing. And honestly, I don't know how much time we should spend on this, but this was a pretty crazy project in so many ways. And we, did things where there was a physical key that you could use to open the virtual cage, like what you see in this moment. The virtual lock will open up, and we were doing like hand collisions with your virtual objects through the sensors, and just really doing too much, honestly. That's kind of the theme of this project. And we also ended up including a real kid in the project, because Terminal 3, we had a real person. So we're like, you know what, we're just going to put the child actor at the end of the experience in the wall in a cage, and you're going to have a confrontation moment with him. And for this, once again, we dealt with child labor laws in Utah and had to get 3 doppelgangers of this kid to sit in the wall pretty much all day running this experience. So I feel weird, honestly, even repeating these words. It was kind of an insane time that we spent so much time and effort building this elaborate experience. But the people that actually went through it, I think came out of a very expansive understanding of what immersive AR storytelling could be. And the reason we framed it all in a bedroom is because everyone has a bedroom. And, this was like an exercise in AR experiences that can be contextual, that we can really, bring out to the world. So, once again, A Jester's Tale was, we didn't take it on a tour or anything. After Sundance, I just was completely tired of the film festival circuit, and it was just so exhausting and expensive to set things up. And, I want things to be very efficient, and we don't want to waste like so much friction setting up a new project, getting rid of it, taking it on tour, all of that kind of stuff. So really needed to figure out a way of building AR, because, clearly we're doing all these things at this point. We have certain things we're trying to achieve with AR. We want to do that at a wider scale, and we want to do it in a way that has quicker iterations where we're building, consistently on one thing for a while. So this is actually a project we did with Serena Williams in the middle, but looking at time, I am definitely taking my time with this. I'm actually going to skip this for the most part. We worked with Serena Williams briefly in the middle of when we were coming out of our festival circuit and kind of moving into product. But we built a hologram of her that is an interactive hologram that is now actually in 200 schools across the country, where kids can actually sit down, have a conversation with Serena Williams. Just like the Terminal 3 technique, we just applied it to more of a, not a commercial use case, but more of a scalable kind of educational use case. But coming out of this, I kind of want to get into, Jadu now, because that's really what the core of my work is now. And looking at the time, I suppose we can spend the next like 15 minutes or something on it, and then open it up for more of the Q&A. So with Jadu, initially the idea was, okay, we want to do what we're doing. Things are working. We want to do it on mobile. We want to reach people. We never wanted to do mobile AR at the start. We were all about headsets, and the whole point was to get rid of, interacting with all of, your digital life through a flat rectangle. So, but however, seeing the trajectory and the fact that mobile AR was at this point reaching, 1 billion devices, and, Snapchat and Instagram were putting out their own brands of AR, which were really filters, which I always thought were really, really constrained and weren't really AR, because really you're not thinking about space. You're not thinking about 3D dimension and moving around in space. You're really just kind of preconceived with this idea of recording a 2D video while you're having a 3D experience. So we wanted to change that over time, but the first thing we did was we started building these musical holograms. The idea was we were working with various musicians, capturing them, as you see here, with 106 cameras and reproducing them in AR. So this is Poppy, who is a metal singer now, but used to be a YouTuber. I'm sure someone in this room probably knows about her. But we built this app where you were able to kind of, bring these really realistic holograms to your space. And, I was going to take us to TikTok and show us some videos, but I'm going to skip that for now. But, we put this app out, and really the idea was that people can record videos with artists. TikTok was kind of blowing up at this time, and this is right when the pandemic was starting, actually, that we put this project out. And just in a year, our work just like exploded because in a year, we ended up, working with Serena Williams and Lil Nas X and Pussy Riot and Vic Mensa, and just really like built out this roster of musician artists that we collaborated with in producing, our work. And a lot of those videos started getting tons of views online, and a lot of teenagers were using the app and making videos with these holograms. And the holograms, as I said, look incredibly realistic. It's very hard to tell that they're virtual and augmented on top of the camera. So we were finding some success with this. But while we were finding some success with it, some other things were happening. I was personally getting really into NFTs and Web3 and everything that came with it. And I know that a bunch of other people on our team were. Mac Boucher, who is one of he's like our world building lead and was one of our creative technologists. He produced a project with Grimes that was, an NFT project that did really well and was really one of the first. And, being so close to him, I saw that whole process and just found it all really fascinating. And so it just coincided with a time when Nadia from Pussy Riot and I were working on a music video. So I was actually directing my first music video for Pussy Riot, and we decided to release it as an NFT instead of just on YouTube. And that's when things started to get really real, because the NFT sold for $500,000 and the video on YouTube made $50. And that's when I really started looking deeply into this stuff, because something was happening. And was it sustainable? Was it inflated? It's all up for grabs, but something really interesting was happening in terms of how people associate value with things. And I really dove deep into it, because the one thing we were missing in AR was a business model. And I'd never attempted one, because I knew none of the ones that existed at that point made sense. So we had never monetized anything we'd built at this point. We were raising money, taking it to festivals. Maybe we would charge a licensing fee sometime somewhere, but really we were not truly like monetizing our projects. And once this started to happen, it made sense that it was time for us to kind of figure out what it looks like to use some of these Web3 oriented concepts to allow AR to actually be a mainstream, big, sustainable platform. Because AR is a really special platform, in my opinion. It interfaces with our world really directly. Once you have room scale AR, and then you have world scale maps, and a persistent layer, it's you are actually like people's, and once you have incentive systems on top of that, you're really like dealing with people moving on the physical planet, and going from one place to another, and it just affects things so directly instead of online or in another game world, that I think it's a really critical medium, actually, which I think it's really critical that people that participate in it also own it, and play a role in how it works and how it functions and how it operates. So I started feeling like we have to shift. I started feeling like we had to pivot away from musical holograms, which we'd found success with. And we don't care that much about TikTok at the end of the day. We don't care too much about 15-second videos people can make and post. We've always been about like AR storytelling and building elaborate things within AR, and really kind of insisting on the things that make AR such a special medium, which are things like presence and context, and augmenting your space, making you think of it differently, and all these ideas that we were exploring for such a long time. So we wanted to really like go back into that properly. So looking at the NFT space at that time, this is what we were seeing emerge. People were buying really ridiculously expensive apes and CryptoPunks and all these kind of PFP projects, which really what was happening was that they were being treated as collectibles, and there was this membership to a community element, which CryptoPunks wasn't intending on doing that, but it started to happen over time anyway. And Bored Ape Yacht Club was more intently actually trying to do that. They were trying to facilitate somewhat of a membership to a club that brings more things in the future, right? And it's just the model was so new that it worked so effectively for them. And, it's become what it is now. Where realistically, really what's happening is you have a 10,000 items that are all unique, and the IP of those items is owned by the people that purchase that NFT. And by owning the IP, and the more expensive the NFTs become, the more valuable the IP becomes, the more resources both the team and the owners have in order to do more with the brand and to push it forward. And it was just this really bizarre way of, doing ownership. It's kind of become an IP now that's we're going to see video games and products and all kinds of things kind of emerging out of this IP that got created so quickly that, got so much attention. And I know there's a lot of criticism, and, I'd love to dive into that kind of stuff in the Q&A if people are interested. But regardless, we were seeing this emergence of community around certain, aesthetics, certain concepts, certain moral ideologies, even, if you may. And the next step we were seeing was that a lot of people were starting to create 3D versions of these avatars, because the avatars were starting to become identity for people, something that you kind of channel your online persona through. So as these avatars started becoming 3D, we saw an opportunity to bring them to augmented reality and make them playable characters. And, then further kind of provide them with other game elements that they can kind of interact with and play with, because holograms were starting to feel somewhat limiting, because, you would record it, that would be the performance, we would deal with musicians and their egos and their lawyers, and it was a mess, and we weren't able to move as quickly as we wanted to. So moving into this direction, we knew that everything would be in our own control. We would have our own creative agency, as well as, be able to kind of operate on our own timelines. So we build what you see here, which is, the kind of a hybrid between what Jadu used to be and what Jadu is trying to be going forward, where you can bring in an avatar, make it a playable character, and bring in other items that the avatar can use. Now, this is a really simple thing if you come to think about it, but we always treated AR as a first-person medium, and that's true for most people. I think AR gets treated as a first-person medium. Once we kind of added this new character in the middle of you and the rest of the world, suddenly there are all these new interactions that kind of popped up that became possible. And, that's kind of what you see here is you can control this avatar, move it around, do a lot of things with it. The avatars understand space and, use LiDAR over time, can become more and more intelligent. They can respond to their surroundings. They can understand objects that are around them. And it just starts to become a more and more elaborate platform for these game interactions. And another thing that we did as part of, getting this app together, which we released a test version of, we released a series of jetpacks that you could use within the app to fly the avatars. Initially, that was the concept. It was a simple thing. And, obviously an NFT of this nature is also, to some extent, trying to be a way to invest in the company, right? Like that's what it becomes. This becomes our genesis item that a bunch of people will purchase and hold. And, in return, the value of the asset is going to correspond to our progress in terms of building our platform and future items that exist within our platform. So when we released jetpacks, the initial idea was, as I said, very simple. You use them to fly around in AR. But when we actually released them, we just had these like shocking results, which was that the jetpacks, 1,000 jetpacks, they all minted, which is, the word you use for, the creation of an NFT at 0.111 ETH, which I imagine at that point, I think was $400, something around that range. And so for $400, people could buy this virtual jetpack, and we sold out in like 20 seconds, which was just absurd to me at that time, because we released the jetpacks and I went to the jetpack minting website to get the first one just to see if it was working. And I tried to mint one, and it started processing, and I went to our Discord, which is where our community gathers, to announce that the mint was now live. And when I went back to the website, my transaction had failed because we had sold out before my test transaction. So that was just mind-blowing to us. And the figures you see here are the figures that we kind of got out of the first 48 hours, where we did $370,000 in sales on the jetpacks, and then a thriving secondary market emerged where people started trading their jetpacks. and we were getting a 5% commission on it. And so that was once again like a really interesting, weird thing to happen. And we used this moment as momentum to go and raise a round of financing. So, this is really like when we raised a proper round of financing for Jadu, the company building this AR game world. And, so we raised $7 million that we announced this December. And, the money came from a bunch of crypto-oriented firms. It came from a bunch of more consumer product-oriented firms as well. And, we tried to include a bunch of entertainment industry people in it as well, because there is obviously that element to it. So, now like Snoop Dogg and Lewis Hamilton and, Coinbase and General Catalyst and a very like wide range of investors, Ashton Kutcher and Gaia Series, Sound Ventures. So we were able to like raise a really significant round, leading off the success of our jetpacks to build this kind of world scale AR gaming platform. Now, we knew that we needed another. So actually, let me take a step back on this one. So I feel like I'm running over time. So, one thing that I want to say is the thing that really surprised me the most about this moment was the community. I know that people talk about community all the time, and it just felt like a buzzword. And when we did this launch, for some reason, I really was under the impression, oh, people are going to buy their jetpacks, they're going to use it within the app, and we're interest is going to die down over time, and we'll go do another thing, and we'll keep working on this. But instead, the people that purchased the jetpacks were so obsessive about it, and which emerged out of a few things, right? Like one, there is an investment bias in NFTs. You want whatever you're purchasing to do well, so you want to support it. And it creates this dynamic where you have this community of hundreds of people that want to tune in to you on a daily basis and engage. And so we started doing these town halls every 2 weeks and, getting together with the community and kind of forming relationships, seeing names that pop up again and again. And, a lot started happening with the community, and, we learned a lot from it. And at this point, we've come a long way. But straight after jetpacks, we decided to have our second drop, which, I'm going to rush through, but we released 6,666 hoverboards, which was our next item that works within our game world. And, the hoverboards, we were able to collaborate. I'm going to play this, but turn the audio off. We were able to collaborate with, Grimes and Lewis Hamilton and Snoop Dogg, and one of my professors from my college, Mimi, who is, teaching at Bennington. We brought her on as one of our signature series hoverboard artists as well. And we designed these hoverboards with those, the names that I just mentioned. And we had a really significant release. The hoverboards work with an AR similar to how jetpacks work. They can be kind of used and written and, play a role within the overarching game world. And, this is Snoop Dogg's avatar from, one of the avatars that, Snoop Dogg recently released as part of his collection. And that is the Snoop Dogg hoverboard that he's riding around in AR. So, the hoverboard sale ended up being even more successful. We ended up selling $4.7 million worth of hoverboards. And since then, the combined jetpack and hoverboard secondary sales market has exceeded $20 million. And we're taking a 5% commission on every sale. So even just in commissions alone, we've made $1 million over the last 2-3 months, basically. And the largest sale was the most expensive jetpack, which was a gold jetpack that was sold for almost $500,000, which is all absurd. It's really, it's emerging out of, obviously our expertise within AR that we've been developing for so long, combined with this mania that we're seeing right now, people wanting to, invest in these digital assets in order to work together with project teams to create new products. So really, we're doing what we were doing forever, which is building an AR platform and, figuring out how exactly it gets structured to achieve what. And this is, what is letting us do that now. And it's happening with this core community that, is interested in every single thing we're doing. And, we're able to build what we're building So, I have tons of slides still to go through, which it's probably not necessary. I think what we should do is just open it up with the panelists. And I know this was a lot of information, but this is where we can hopefully start synthesizing it in the form of some questions and really dive into what's happening, especially with Jadu and the Mirrorverse. So does that sound reasonable? If that's the case,
Yes.
I'll stop sharing. Sweet.
Thank you, Assad. Amazing journey. And regarding the community, it's now that when we invite people with NFT collections, the number of participants watching our talk goes way up. So it definitely is a tight community. The other panelists, do you want to come on? No. Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hold on one second. All right, so why don't we go to our panelists? Who wants to start with a question? You can put your hand up or just, okay. Penelope.
Hi, so I love your work, and I'm struck by so many things, but bearing in mind our time restrictions, I was curious about the influence of your upbringing in the work that you're doing now, because somewhat like you, I'm from a country that is considered the third world. I'm from Trinidad in the Caribbean. And unlike you, we only had one computer in our entire school. And so much of when I'm thinking about my work and the iterations of what I see in my mind's eye, I oftentimes reflect on that sort of sense of lack, but it's not really a sense of lack. It's more of a use of imagination. Whereas, you then end up surrounded by classmates and friends who had so much more access to technology and all of the things that I guess you are now sort of building into. And I'm curious just to hear your thoughts about that. It's a less technical question. I have a lot of those, but I think that it's just really interesting to hear how it informs your process.
Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time in this presentation talking about my childhood for that reason. I left home when I was 16, and I've not seen my family for the last 4 years because of various visa reasons and whatnot. And so, regardless of all the success with my company and everything, that is definitely kind of the deep hole in my life of just knowing that I've been away from my parents for so long. And so when you're in that kind of position, you obviously also become very nostalgic about your childhood and obsess over your upbringing and what led to the decisions that, you're making now. So yeah, I think it's really like Terminal 3 was really one of those moments where I felt like my experience and where I'd grown up and whatnot was mattered enough for it to be part of the work. Before that, there was a more of an escapist kind of idea where I just wanted my work to be purely about technology and the future, and that was the brand and that was the idea. It was really, I was actually working with one of my professors, Karthik Pandyan, who's he's a visual artist. He teaches at Harvard now, but he used to be at Bennington, and him and I did a bunch of tutorials together. That's a really nice thing Bennington does, where you and one professor can do a class together, just the two of you on whatever subject you want. And so him and I were kind of working together in that manner. And he was the one that really pushed me to kind of incorporate my experience of growing up and into the core work and use that as a jumping off point. So, I think regardless of whether someone had access to things or didn't have access to things, that is informing where they are now. And I think allowing that to really speak through your work and, give people that perspective, I think is a really big strength, actually, that a lot of kids that have access from the start don't have that, so there are pros and cons. Yeah.
All right, Srushti.
Can you hear me? Is this good? Okay. Hi, Assad. I thank you for sharing your story. I also left home at 18, so I understand and empathize with that feeling. But I've also noticed as you do leave home, community becomes like your way of coping. So I want to know more about this community around your NFTs.
Yes.
I want to tell me about, who are these people? What are the types of relationships that are emerging? Are they professional? I know some people in the chat from your community are here. So if they're comfortable, maybe even they could drop in, like, who are you? What do you do? Why are you interested? What drove you? Maybe, yeah, just like trying to foster this conversation because it's fascinating to me.
Yep, yep. It's fascinating. It's my favorite part of what we're doing now. And it's the most unexpected part of what we're doing now. You know, like I expected at this age to possibly have a company of 20 to 30 people that I was leading, but I didn't expect that it would also come with a community of 20,000 people who also are very tied with this stuff. And, you know, we have around 5,000 people that actually hold our assets. A lot of those people have made life-changing amount of money through participating in our ecosystem, which really what that means is that you know, they're tied to this brand in a way that traditionally brands have not been able to do this for you, right? Because usually you're giving your money to a company. The idea that a company is going to give you a product that's going to make you money for participating in an ecosystem is so brand new, right? So what I want to say about the community, the way I think about Jadu in its current format is there are three things. There is the game, the economy, and the community. And all these three things are actually individually fully functional as well. They all feed into each other, but you could be a player in the game without caring about the community or the economy. You can be a speculator in the economy without caring about the community or the game, and you can be a community member without too much care for the economy or the game. And obviously, if you do all of those things, the way we were trying to structure our world is that if you care about all of those three things, we offer you a very wholesome, you know, experience of a good life. Everything a good life should contain, from intellectual curiosity to aesthetic sensibilities to a sense of belonging to financial security. We try to touch everything within our world through these three parameters that we have at our disposal. And, you know, the few things that I would say about our community, I'm going to highlight three moments that we've had recently. One moment was when we were airdropping these new sandbox jetpacks to our holders. What that means is that there is another game world called the Sandbox, and we have some jetpacks that function there. So all the people that hold jetpacks, we're going to get these free new assets, some of which were worth thousands of dollars. And we had an issue in our airdrop, so we accidentally ended up sending two to a lot of people. And that was a huge blunder, honestly, like probably on my part, and I freaked out and I was like, damn, like this is a huge issue. And so we went to the community and we rallied for support, and literally hundreds of people that are anonymous, that have no accountability with us, that have no legal reason, we don't know their name, return their jetpacks to us. So people practically return like $200,000 worth of assets because they wanted to be good community members. And that is just beyond what people are used to seeing in the crypto space, where you often, you know, realistically, what is crypto allowing us to do? It is a way to structure new economic systems that are really, you can iterate very quickly on, and that are very flexible. You have a lot of space to kind of experiment with them. Now, and they are on somewhat of a standardized layer. So there are enough people that agree that there's some standardized protocol to form this financial system. And obviously, if you let humans go and make their own economic systems, almost all of the early ones are going to be scams and are going to be overly leveraged to make their participants very wealthy, in which case they're not going to be sustainable. And that's what we're seeing right now. That's what 99% of all of crypto is. It is scam projects, and it is overly leveraged projects that are trying to make their participants rich. Now, that doesn't mean that the idea of being able to design a custom economy cannot be very strong, and it cannot come with a lot of strength and a lot of goodness if you design it for that. So that's been our goal of like, how do we design this economy that supports our community, that creates a sense of, you know, belonging and relationship. So that the sandbox jetpacks being returned was a really key moment for us. And since then, we had a release of snowboards. We released hoverboards as physical snowboards, which I thought was really interesting because, you know, we sold 500 snowboards in 24 hours. We're not a snowboarding company, and our community is not oriented around snowboarding, but people bought the products even if they don't snowboard. Like, you know, it's the kind of, we've become a brand where we can sell a product that will give people a hobby, not because they're in the market for that thing, but because we can give them a hobby. You know, that's the sense of community that we have. And the last thing I want to point out is that last Friday, when the Ukraine situation started unfolding on Thursday, actually, we raised a fundraiser and were able to raise $76,000 out of our community in 24 hours for Ukraine, which once again was just people contributing because they participate, and once again a wholesome understanding of what it means to live a good life includes being able to help in those situations, and we encouraged that, and that took place. So in terms of demographics, we don't know too much, and we don't collect that kind of information right now. People are anonymous, they can be whoever they want to be, and there are a lot of factors that kind of go into this. There are college kids that are in there. There are people that have kids of their own that participate, that often talk about how their kids are using their jetpacks and hoverboards. So, it's a relatively global community as well. I know that a lot of people in Pakistan have been getting more and more involved. So it's been really interesting to see it evolve. And these are a few things I wanted to point out.
Wow. Vivek, I think you were next.
I think actually Asya was ahead.
Okay.
No, please.
Thanks, Vivek. Thank you, Asad, for this awesome presentation. I really appreciated the terminal project, and the story, your personal story that drove it. And I find in a lot of this interactive work, when people choose to embody, in VR, especially the person with less power, and your choice to have people embody the interrogator is a really radical choice, I think, because, there's this this empathy model that we talk a lot about in documentary that I have a problem with, because it doesn't interrogate the actual structures. But when you're embodying the interrogator, you have to ask that question. You have to ask questions about the system and the structures. And so I really appreciated that project. Sorry, my puppy. And anyway, so I'm thinking about story, what, this question of kind of what comes first, the technology or the story, and how, through your body of work, that's kind of shifted. And I'm very curious, in the space that you've landed in with AR gaming, and particularly with this, really robust community that you have. Where is the story, where's the storytelling that can make this community more robust, that can kind of also, I think, tie the threads between the community, the gaming, and the economy. And I wonder how you're thinking about story within, this particular space.
For sure. Yeah, so I really like what you said earlier, and I will definitely echo that, because, when I started doing my AR work, VR was the empathy machine. That was the term everyone was using. VR is the empathy machine. And, at film festivals, we were seeing a lot of projects where you would put on a VR headset and you would be transported to, let's say, a refugee camp in Syria. And you come out of it with this, in my opinion, this sense of this delusional sense of moral superiority, that now I know how it feels like to be in this person's shoes. And, often it was in these really safe, kind of liberal, festival settings. So I wanted something that was, you shouldn't be comfortable. You're not in a place of comfort. You're in another person's situation. So bringing someone else to your space turns out to be a lot more effective than going to someone else's, in my opinion, because the reality of your own space grounds them, and you see them regardless of the Hololens or not. This is something that I think is very real. When you take the headset off, you have a ghostly presence of that character left behind in your space because your mind saw it there. So kind of going to what you just said, story is really critical, as it's always been. I think this is really the big factor culturally that is going to be different between how Silicon Valley did things and how Web3 is doing things, which is Silicon Valley, you would have 100 people optimizing a button in San Francisco on one floor of a building. And that's everything. When you're doing that, everything looks the same. Everything goes towards the most effective, the most efficient, the most clickable button possible. And that's just one type, This is a different trajectory. This is going back towards it's more maximalist almost. There's more experience to it. The companies can have more of a say. They have more of a voice. They have a tone, they have some sense of, like moral ideology, some sense of aesthetic that they hold up, and are not just trying to be perfectly neutral in any given moment. And that's not what we're trying to do. We have a voice. So the voice, obviously, you channel that through story and world building. And so this is something that we've not really gotten into too much yet publicly, but we are doing a lot of world building. We have a proper writer who's written for TVs and movies that's working with us. We have Mac, who I mentioned earlier, who's doing a lot of our internal world building, and we're building characters and maps and things that all exist on top of the physical planet, where we can tell long-term stories, not 10-minute experiences, like stories that unfold over decades, hopefully, if we do our work well. And this is like, I treat this as my life's work. And now that we've spent the last like 6-7 years doing short, quick projects, one after the other, now is the time to do the long one. And I love, for example, a reference that maybe people wouldn't guess. I love WWE wrestling, just like pro wrestling, with fake wrestling, if you may. I love The Undertaker, for example, which is a character that has been developed over the course of like 3 decades. And week after week, it's like the development of this character that comes and does its theatrics and engages with the audience, and everyone suspends their disbelief for a moment and pretends he's dead. And I love that kind of stuff, and what that does like over the course of like a viewer's life. So we want to do long-term storytelling that brings your space to life, that engages you with community that is unfolding on the same map and the same world, and allows for chance encounters. And the game is really what allows us to do what I was just saying earlier, is like what is a good life missing, right? Like, if people are spending too much time scrolling through mindless TikTok videos, what can they do with that time that would instead add a sense of space, or add a sense of relationship, or whatever these are things that we're explicitly missing in how our social structure is currently structured. Gamifying those elements with economic incentives allow you to change those things. So that's really the way we think about story.
Wow, fascinating. Vivek.
Yeah, thank you. This is all really amazing work and really powerful. And my question actually overlaps somewhat with Asia's. And so in some ways, you partially answered my question. I was just thinking about, I also, was really taken by the Terminal 3 project, and, partly as someone who's experienced a couple of interrogations myself, and agree that move of putting someone in the place of the interrogator, is incredibly powerful. And the other aspect that is clearly incredibly powerful is then placing them in front of the person who they've seen as an somewhat abstracted person, actually as a living, breathing being right in front of them, right? And to me, that sounds like a much more transformative kind of experience than again, the question of projects that attempt to put you in this, for a short period of time, in the standpoint of someone who's the subject of power rather than the person who is engaging in the exercise of power over others. And so partly I'm interested in some of the comments that have been coming up from your community members, this kind of, the power of that interface between the virtual and the embodied, and how, in the couple of projects that you started with, the Terminal One in particular, you're using that interface between the virtual and the embodied as sort of the pivot on which you're affecting a kind of transformation in the person who is engaging, right? And so I'm curious to hear about sort of the community that has formed around Jadu, what that interface is, how where are the transformations, right, that are occurring by participating in the virtual community? And I see a bit of this in the comments on the side, you know, and how is then that kind of transformation, you know, continued outside of that world? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Sure, sure. So I think, you know, it's really fascinating because what we want to do with the AR, which really we're not doing yet, because we need time to develop, right? Like this is in December, we just got this primary sale and then we had the Series A round. So we just got money and we've been hiring rapidly. We've gone from being like 5 people or something a few months ago to 35 people now. You know, so we're hiring rapidly right now. And if we keep growing at the pace that I'm hoping to, by the end of the year, we should be 100 people. And 100 full-time people working on a project with good resources is you can do a lot with that. And, you know, so that's when I think we start to really get into how does augmented reality gameplay at scale affect people's lives in these positive, meaningful kind of manners. But what is happening right now is we're setting up the stage for that. And what do we have? What are our channels to kind of set that stage up? We are using Discord, where our community kind of gets together and communicates with each other. And, you know, there's some programming for them over there, such as, you know, town halls every 2 weeks. And we're now doing a speaker series where we're inviting a bunch of people from the VR AR space that, you know, are pioneers that have been working for decades in the space to come and give lectures for our community to become well versed with what these things are. But beyond that, there's so much stuff that emerges like in a, you know, self-organizing fashion as well, where people get to know each other, people form relationships, right? You know, there are people that have started to, you know, get to know each other that is outside of what we facilitated. There are people that, you know, regularly come to check in. Let's say the market is down or someone lost an NFT or someone got scammed. They're going to come to the community for support. And the community is going to, you know, not, we've seen this happen where someone loses all their NFTs and people get together and just send them some of their assets to make up for it. Like everyone just pools in some resources and picks you up to some extent. You know, it doesn't always happen, obviously, but there is that sense of like camaraderie amongst the community. And really the reason it exists is because, first of all, because people want that in general. People want that in life, you know, especially people that have figured out how to make money or, you know, are, you know, like active in this new thing right now. They definitely want these other things that are more important that, you know, form this kind of fulfilling experience of life. You know, that's been really fascinating to see. I think over the Christmas, like people would come and wish each other, and, you know, a lot of people that live alone, maybe they can't be with their family because of COVID or whatever, you know, come there to form relationships and get to know each other. And we've encouraged this behavior over time because, you know, the beauty of NFTs is that you have, they're assets that can be used as incentive systems. So we do that all the time. We give away hoverboards and jetpacks on an ongoing basis to encourage good behavior. Or, you know, like for example, we gave away a jetpack, which, you know, is an asset worth $10,000 to a random person that shared their origin story one day. So we made a channel called Origin Stories, and everyone was just sharing their stories of, you know, where they came from, what they want, you know, out of the community. And, you know, we had hundreds of messages of people really opening up as anonymous people about, you know, the nice and the good and bad things in their life. And, you know, those are the moments where people get to know each other and form these relationships. They're already tied to each other because they own the same assets that are appreciating or depreciating together, that they're kind of in this with. But then you have this added sense of kind of relationship by knowing each other's stories. So for example, we have a community member whose username is Bumblebee, and Bumblebee just writes these snippets like once a week or twice a week, writes like kind of this creative writing snippet, and often like incorporates a bunch of the themes that you know, are coming up in the community that week. And, you know, it's like things like that. What is that? That is literally someone putting in their creative time and effort to put something out for a limited group of people that they feel have a sense of camaraderie with. So those are the aspects we're seeing right now. And I think what if Jadu, if our team does our job well, we should be able to productize these aspects, these positive things that we're seeing. We should be able to put them in the form of our product within our game so that it encourages people to have these behaviors over the long term as we expand. So for example, I mentioned these snowboards. So the idea was that whatever hoverboard you have, you can get a snowboard in that design. Now, some hoverboards are more rare than others. So we saw this moment where a lot of community members got in touch with other people. Like, for example, I have a Grimes hoverboard that is ultra rare and someone really likes the design. I don't need a snowboard. However, another community member reaches out to me and they're like, hey, I would love to get the snowboard. Can I pay you for you to order me the snowboard that you have? And there are these moments where it's trustless. Someone can send the money and someone doesn't have to send you the snowboard, like there's no way to ensure some of these things. But people do that anyway. People trust each other with their money, and just because we've been able to create a sense of goodwill within the community. And I think that these are, as I said, things that we will productize. We will build actually trustless ways of people to do these kind of things, where you can get together with each other to form a new type of asset, to like form a new type of gameplay, to form a new type of narrative that other people experience. So that's kind of the way we think about it. And I'm just really happy that so much of this has so much of this has emerged without the need for a product to be out.
Kat.
Hey, thanks so much, Assad. And yeah, you touched a little bit on what I was hoping to ask you about to take off from Asya and Vivek's questions around story. And I'm just wondering, like in Web 2, if we consider Web 2 as a story place or a story world, it's just so fragmented. And like you said, like spending hours just kind of scrolling, doom scrolling through TikTok. And this possibility of Web3 and especially the worlding that you're doing now, how much do you feel like there is a possibility for integration or like reintegration of some kind of meaning making through that process? Because it sounds like the worlding is just starting in a way. Is that right?
You were saying the world building is just
the worlding.
Well, it's aspects of it exist. We've have aspects of it that we've channeled through various forms already and have kind of gotten the process going. Like, for example, to get on the whitelist for hoverboards, which whitelist really just all that means is that you're allowed to actually purchase the asset before it is open for public sale, because public sales are very competitive. We made people play a game in AR in order to get onto the list. And that was, once again, a really fascinating process, because that's where we started to do some world building. So you had to kind of solve this puzzle. You had to meet this thing in AR, and a portal opens in your wall and you have to solve a puzzle. And that kind of starts framing some of where our world is being structured. But you are right, like a lot of the really heavy lifting around this is taking place now, where we're taking all the elements we've put out right now and thinking of them from a full world perspective and kind of building our lore bibles and world building and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of that is taking place now. But Kat, do I understand your question correctly? You're saying how can some of the fragmentation of Web 2 like come into Web 3 essentially?
Or the other way, like how is this worlding process that you're just undertaking? I'm so curious to learn more about it. Are you feeling like it is creating the possibility of more of a reintegration of meaning as we in terms of storytelling and story giving?
I think so. Because really, what do people want? Like people like don't want half the things they end up actually doing. No one wants to spend time scrolling through videos like that they're not going to remember, that are just an immediate thing, and half the times you're not even paying attention. No one would pay to do that, but you would do it for free. And that's kind of this interesting thing that's happened to our culture is, things are just so readily available and free. And then you don't care as much about their quality or what they are because they're free, And I think that has created this dynamic where we like our culture and our society supports the creation of media that is, you know, quick turnaround, quick and trendy, trying to grab your attention. And those are not qualities of like good media. Those are not qualities of someone sitting down and being like, okay, I'm gonna create this thing and it's gonna make someone feel this way, or it's gonna achieve this idea. And, you know, I went to a friend invited me to something in LA. There was some influencer panel of some sorts, and it was a bunch of TikTok kids, you know, talking about their careers, or, you know, and so much of it was just they had such short attention spans, they wouldn't even able to follow a question that was asked by a moderator or by someone. Everything was just falling through all over the place. And I was like, wow, like Pink Floyd was this age when they recorded Dark Side of the Moon. Like, what have we done to our, you know, how have we gotten to this point? Like, where is that element of it? So that really, like, that's how I think about what we're doing. Where, you know, when you are purchasing as an asset, you're obsessing over it. People wake up and look at their jetpacks in the morning. You know what I mean? And like, it's the same jetpack. There's nothing new is happening on it, but it's since, you know, for the first time, I think for a certain generation, people are like looking at a thing for a long period of time, or not just scrolling past it. They're looking at it. They're forming a relationship with it. They're trying to get more out of it than, you know, what people get out of everything that's on the internet, which feels very disposable. So I think it's the main thing that AR has been missing, in my opinion. AR has always been disposable. It's always been, oh, a filter, you try it quickly and you just get it over with. Or a cool interaction you saw in a Twitter video or a LinkedIn post. It's never meant anything. It doesn't, none of the interactions is part of a greater world that has any consequences. So now that we're getting into things where people have relationships with their hoverboards and jetpacks, we are able to, for example, we did unboxings for hoverboards. So you would unbox your hoverboard. It was this nice little interaction moment. You would get a box and you would get your character over to the box and open it, and your hoverboard would come out and you would see it for the first time. You know, it's a simple interaction. And if it was a filter, it would not mean as much to people. But now that it's tied to something that you own, that you have a relationship with, that, you know, kind of engages your imagination, attaches you to a community, brings you, you know, financial, you know, security, like you're going to want to care a lot more about it. And so that's been really lovely, like of just being able to make small interactions and allowing them to have so much meaning because of the context of the community and the assets.
Great. All right, let's take some questions here from the audience. There's one that a person who asked, what should I study at university to be able to work in this field?
So I think, you know, it's different for different people, you know, like there's so much possibility right now in terms of what you can do in this space. So there's a lot you can do. I think the biggest thing I would say is totally learn how to program and make things, because I really think that it's people think it's so hard. It's really not. Like, it's really not, you know. You can do so much with little, very little. And, you know, holograms from Syria was literally Photoshop cropped images, dragged and dropped into a game engine. Like, anyone can make that over, like, opening and learning for the first time for a week. Someone can make that, in my opinion, right? So it's not about like how much you can do and how skilled of a programmer you are or anything. It's just about being able to throw something together. I see this all the time, where I see projects that have been out raising financing for a project for like 2 years now. And it shocks me, because I'm like, 2 years is so much time. You could just sit down and make it during that time. Like, it's the same effort you're spending trying to raise resources for it. That, like, you know, anyone can learn anything at the end of the day. Sure, some things come more naturally to one person than the other, but you know, like programming and being able to put things together, there are tutorials all over the place. You can rely on people's help. Just don't be afraid to actually get your hands dirty to make a thing when you feel like making a thing, you know. Like, I think that's really critical. So for me, whenever I came up with a project, it was an excuse to learn the things I need to do to make it. And there's so much motivation when you know what you're trying to make, right? Like, I did not learn Unity and game engines and these kind of things in the perfect way where I took the intro tutorial and then I learned all the tools. It was never that. It was like, okay, I want to do this thing. How do I figure out to do this thing? And there's an immediate sense of, kind of gratification because the moment you figure it out, you have your project. So I really would recommend that. It depends on personality types. If you think you're the type of person that needs, more guidance, go study game design or game development. It's something that I think there's going to be no shortage of the need for game developers, and there's so much flexibility in terms of what you can create and build. Like, it's at the end of the day, these are like mini like simulation machines. We can just make whatever we want, and we can like practically design experience with this format. So I would highly recommend people to explore that. It's not just about gaming anymore. I've never been a huge gamer or anything, but it's not about that anymore. It's about being able to create experiences in whatever format you want in really flexible manners. And that's a really strong skill to have. And if you're the type of person that can learn that in their free time, then go to school for critical theory, like expand your mind in different ways, like, push yourself to be able to do more with your technical ability. That was the case for me, where I had some sense of technical ability. I wanted better framing on how I structure my projects and, how I think of what I create. And, Bennington became a good place for me to do that. I didn't really take any programming classes at Bennington because I felt like I had that ready. So really, I think it's about complementing. School is a good time to go do things that you probably wouldn't be able to yourself.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you, Assad, so much for this incredibly inspiring and fascinating talk. And thank you to all the panelists and to the audience for joining us today. Please join us next week when MIT's Chris Wally, Chris Bobel, and a former ODL alum, Jeff Soik, will be with us, talk about their project. And for now, goodbye and thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.